Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Daniel Midson-Short back with episode 15 of Self Improvement Saturday. Episode 15. Amazing. We made it. Good morning to those of you on YouTube and hello to those of you on Instagram who are watching this later or with me right now. It's great to have everybody here. I'm excited to be back. The weather is chilling out here in California, as you can see from my hoodie. It's nice and fresh outside. It's a sunny, beautiful day, and I got a fresh cup of coffee here, and I'm ready to roll. Good to be here with you all, my friends. Delicious. Yes, I'm excited to be back. It's been a couple of weeks. I've had a busy few weeks with Thanksgiving and different events and things like that I've been working on. And I've been working hard in the background on different things, such as the book I'm writing and different things with my website, etc., etc. So I have a interesting episode today, something I have been thinking about for quite a while, and I didn't really know how to frame this episode. It just came to me earlier this week because I was thinking about a couple of things for myself, and I started thinking, why are we so hard on ourselves? Why are we so mean and cruel and judgmental and tough on ourselves when other people aren't? So that's what we're going to talk about today. There's not a lot of life updates really, except to say that life is wonderful. I'm now a married man, so I have a amazing wife, Lauren, who is incredible, and life is going great, and we are very, very happy and grateful to be together. So I don't really have a lot to share on that front, but it's wonderful, and thank you to everyone who gave us the wonderful well wishes on our wedding, and life is just great in that respect. For anyone who is hoping to find love, I promise you that it is out there for you. If you keep believing and you keep persisting, you will find it for yourself. And that's all I need to say about that. All right. Let's talk about why we are so hard on ourselves. This is such an interesting topic. This is something that I think I have struggled with probably my entire life. Ever since I can remember, there has been a voice in my head that has been criticizing and condemning and questioning things that I do, things that I'm thinking of doing, things that I did, and is a constant critic. And I'm sure you have these things in your life too. No matter who you are, there's a sort of a second voice or a part of yourself that is constantly deriding you and beating you down and making life more difficult for you. And it's strange that we have this because you would think as human beings that our goal is to preserve ourselves and to make our lives better and to do everything we can to achieve that. But for some reason, when it comes to ourselves, we have, as I was saying, almost this like double brain, these two modes of thinking where we want to do certain things in our lives. And then on the other hand, we're kind of judging and beating ourselves up for wanting to do them or doing them or saying certain things or whatever. And it's like a weird kind of negative regulation, if you like. So today, I want to do a bit of a deep dive into this topic of why we are so hard on ourselves, why we judge ourselves so often and so harshly, and what we can do to change that. Because it is something that I think if you can get a handle on this and you can stop doing it as much, you will find life becomes easier, much more enjoyable, and it flows a lot more for you. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to do is talk about Sigmund Freud, which is never an easy topic to talk about because Freud had some out there ideas. He was a pioneer in the world of psychology, and he definitely had some interesting ideas. If you've read anything about his concepts, so I'm not going to go too deep into who he was or what he did. But at the time, he was trying to really understand a lot of the things that drive human nature, and he did get some things right. In particular, the thing that I want to share with you, and I have my notes here as always that I'm going to work from. In particular, the thing I want to share with you is this idea of the id, the ego, and the superego. And this is something that I believe we can learn from Freud that shows us why we judge ourselves so harshly sometimes. So let me break them down a little bit. So first of all, we have the id, which is spelled ID. And that essentially represents the unconscious drives that we all have as human beings. They're almost like the childlike urges that we have within ourselves. We just want things. We're compelled to do them. We don't think about them. We just feel them a lot of the time. Now, these can be things like being hungry. They can be sex drive. They can be anger. they can be jealousy, envy, they can also be love, they can be joy. There are a lot of different emotions and urges that we have that are driven from the id, from the very core part of who we are as a human being. And that's good and it's bad, because if we don't regulate in some ways, it will take over our lives. You'll notice as you grow from a young child into say a teenager, you definitely start to regulate your urges more, but sometimes they fight against it. And that's why you get rebelliousness as a teenager, because the id is kind of fighting against other parts of your psyche and also your environment, the people around you. So that's the first part, the id. The second part is the ego, and this is more of the reality and the conscious part of each of us. This is the part of us that starts to develop as we grow into younger children and then teenagers and then adults. We start to be aware of the world around us and we begin to regulate based on the rules and the norms, and it's very conscious and we're aware of it in ourselves. So it's the part that starts to make us more kind of an active participant in life, makes us more of a responsible person. And it's kind of a healthy thing to have. If you have a clear and balanced ego, generally speaking, you're a nice person to be around, you are responsible for yourself, and you live a better life. So that's the ego. And that's the part of yourself. When you think about the word I, the ego is the part of yourself that you're kind of referring to. It's the most balanced, conscious part of yourself. The third component is what we call the superego. And this is the most interesting one. This is the righteous or the judgmental or critical parent part of our mind, or our subconscious mind. And this is built based on rules and culture and regulation. And it's the most extreme part of those things. So in the world of religion, if you've ever been in a sort of religious place or environment, you'll notice there's a lot of this sort of super ego discussion. And usually it's in the form of God or rules or standards of things we should or shouldn't do. And they can be very condemning. They can be very cruel and judgmental if we don't follow them. So the superego is actually, it's not real, but it's something that we develop because we believe that other people or the society that we live in or the world or whatever is judging us very, very harshly. It may or may not be true. In some environments, it is more true than others, but most of the time, the superego part of us is what's driving this criticism and this meanness that we have towards ourselves. So just to recap, we have the id, which is the kind of childish urge part of ourselves, which brings us all the fun parts of life and makes us want to do things however we want to do them right now. Then we have the ego, which is the more conscious part of ourselves, which is the normal part, if you like. And then we have the superego, which is the judging, criticizing, condemning part. So you can imagine, if you think about why we are so hard on ourselves, it's the superego that is driving a lot of that. It's the part of ourselves that's saying, oh, why did you do this? What were you thinking? Oh, no, what are we going to do now? It's starting to, judge yourself very quickly. And what it's actually doing is trying to keep the id in check, the compulsive, childlike part of yourself, and bring you back more into societal norms. The risk is if you lean too much into listening to your superego, it's never going to let you off the hook. It's always going to be too moral, too righteous, too harsh in its judgments, because it's an idealized version of who you should be or what you should think or how you are. So there is no reality attached to the superego, but we all kind of listen to it, especially if we think that we've done something out of the norm or out of our character or out of acceptance from other people. So whenever you have this sort of feeling of, oh, why did I do this? Or I'm an idiot, or I can't believe I said that, or what if I do this and people judge me? It's the super ego that is kicking in, and it's kind of pushing against your ego, your reality, your conscious self. It is a good thing in some ways, but when it goes too far, just realize that it's not reality. It's sort of a hyper version of your consciousness or your morality or whatever you want to say. That's pushing back against you. And so knowing that, it makes it easier to kind of regulate and balance and be like, okay, I don't want to be a compulsive child and just doing whatever the hell I want in my life and not caring. And at the same time, I don't need to be completely judged and always being moral and righteous and serious and perfect. I got to be in the middle. I got to be myself. And generally speaking, who you are as a person, the person you feel you are when you say the word I, is a good person, is a person who is moral, who is honest, who is responsible, who is fun, who is kind, all those things. So lean into that and trust that your ego is regulating enough. You don't need the super ego to push and bully you. So thank you to Freud for that one. It took me a long time to understand that, and I hope it helps to balance a little bit of the understanding of why we judge ourselves so harshly. But the next time you notice yourself doing it, think, that's my super ego that's catching me out and that's judging me more harshly than I need to. That's the first idea. The next idea is evolutionary judgment. And this one is more recent. If you've read any evolutionary psychology, and I've read a lot of books by people like Matt Ridley, he's a great evolutionary psychologist. Richard Dawkins is another one. It's quite heavy stuff, but I tried to delve into it a couple of years ago. There's a lot of people, Jeffrey Miller's another great one as well. There's a lot of authors who talk about these topics in a lot of depth, and it's very scientific, but hey, if you're into it, check it out. The idea of evolutionary regulation or social regulation is something that a lot of us are we're aware of it, but we don't realize that it's happening to us. And the theory here is that evolutionarily speaking, depending how you believe, we evolved as a species, as a human race, in tribes of about 100 to 150 people. So wherever we lived in the world, there was a tribe or a community around us of around 100 to 150 people. If it got bigger than that, the tribe would start to split. Two leaders would emerge and they would start to move away and they would build their own kind of tribes. And they would do that again and again and again. And that's how the world grew. When you live in a community of around 100 to 150 people, you tend to know everybody in that community. You're aware of all the nuances. You're aware of who's a high status person, who's a low status person, who's connected to who. You know all the little kind of subtleties. And if you think about your life, say in school or high school, it was kind of similar where you knew kind of everyone's name, you knew what kind of personality they had, and you had a bit of an awareness of who was cool and who was not, and who had power and who you had to fear, and who was the popular kid and who was a nerd, and all those kind of things. That's because generally, evolutionarily, we are aware of these things because that's how we evolved as a species. So we're very aware of the group around us. Back in those times, in the early development times of the world, if you went against the tribe, if you did or said something that was not a standard or was not accepted by the normal parts of your group of 100 to 150 people, you were condemned, and very often you were rejected or pushed out of that tribe. And in those harsh times, that meant that you would die because you'd be out on your own. You wouldn't be able to forage for food. An animal would try and eat you. You'd probably die because you'd have no shelter and no warmth. So it was very, very risky to step outside the norm of what you perceive to be the tribe. You wouldn't challenge the leader. You wouldn't try to change the behavior. Otherwise, you would be ostracized, rejected, and you would basically be condemned to death. So you can fast forward that idea, that deep-rooted urge to fit in and to not stand out, not to push yourself too far out of the norm. Fast forward that by 100,000, a couple of million years, and you can see why that's so ingrained in our brains. Because, man, if I do this, if I say something or do something that's a little bit out of the norm from what everyone else does, I'm going to be rejected and I'll probably die. That's very much at the base of our brainstem, and it compels us to self-regulate, to stay within the norms of our tribe. What's really interesting, I noticed, is that when I moved country, but from Australia to the United States, is that the societal norms are different. And my behavior was still regulating based on Australia. There were certain cultural things in Australia you do and you don't do, and you say and you don't say. And I would behave in that way. But Americans, and in particular Californians, have a different culture to Australia, where I grew up. So I had to re-regulate, and I had to realize, it's okay to say or to do these things here, and I can't do them in Australia. In the reverse, when I go back to Australia to visit, I have to re-regulate to Australian culture because there's certain things that I've started to do and to say and to be in a certain way that aren't really acceptable in Australia. They're not really extreme, but they're very subtle and they're there. And I quickly remember, whenever I go into that culture, I need to regulate myself and the norms. So you can probably see where I'm going with this. This idea of evolutionary self-regulation is that we all have this awareness of what's acceptable in our culture, in our families, in our groups, in our societies, and we tend to regulate ourselves based on that. And the risk is if you start to step outside of that, quickly you will judge yourself harshly. You'll be like, oh, I better not say that. I better not do that. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? What was I thinking? Oh, no. And we fall into this trap of pushing and beating ourselves up to try to stay within the regulated norms. Most of the time, it's actually a good thing because it stops you from stealing people's property or murdering someone or doing something really bad. But at the same time, on the other end, it can stop you from really expressing yourself, from being your authentic self, from living your life in the way you want to. And I've talked a lot about that in other videos too, that when I came to America, I could kind of reinvent because the societal norms were different and I could become a different version of myself. But it took me, I would say, maybe 5 years to be like, it's okay. I can be this way here in this culture versus where I grew up. And it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just different. And you probably have experienced the same thing. If you've changed schools or you've changed communities or changed companies or moved countries or whatever, part of you has changed as a result because the norms changed and you could regulate differently. So that's the evolutionary part of it. And I think it's important to be aware of that and to stack that on top of Freud's idea of the id, the ego, and the superego. Those two things will help you to understand why we do this and why we're so mean to ourselves. Let's now talk about what the problem is with being hard on ourselves, why it's actually a bad thing. Because in some respects, it could actually be a good thing that we're hard on ourselves, right? We're more disciplined, we're more responsible, we're a good, upstanding citizen, we're kind, we're polite, we save money, we exercise. And if you think of someone like, I don't know, a David Goggins, right? He's a good example of this. Mr. out there training at 2 a.m. with no shirt on, yelling at himself. Sure, for some people, that's great, and that's who they are. That's how they regulate themselves. He's pretty harsh on himself, and his philosophy, because of his military background, is that he's very harsh and judgmental, and it kind of works. The problem is that I think internally we tend to just denigrate ourselves and beat ourselves up and be mean to ourselves and make ourselves unmotivated. Someone like David Goggins, his whole goal of doing that is to get you to lift your standards and be a better version of yourself. But most of the time when we're harsh to ourselves and we say, you idiot, why did you do this? What were you thinking? Or, oh no, if I do that, what's going to happen? We tend to limit ourselves. We don't grow as a result. We actually shrink. And that's the problem with being too harsh on ourselves and regulating too violently or being too mean to ourselves in the moment. But in some respects, it can be good to be tougher on yourself. And eventually what I notice happens is that this becomes a destructive habit. So you fall into this trap of constantly checking your negative biases or your negative self-talk before you do anything. And this is one of the reasons that people don't take risks in their lives, because they're balancing everything they want to do and everything they want to be against the negative version, the super ego or the extreme self-regulation, instead of actually their ambitions or their desires or who they feel that they really are as a person. And this can be tough to kind of overcome. So I think the reason that talking meanly to yourself or being so hard on yourself is a bad thing generally is because we tend to become demotivated, and also it becomes a destructive habit where we limit our behavior and we constantly look for permission from this negative part of ourselves, which is never going to give us permission. It's never going to encourage and support us. So we have to kind of stop feeding it. We have to stop listening to it and giving it so much weight and importance inside our own brains. The next thing I want to talk about is how we tend to do this, how we tend to be hard on ourselves. And I think there's 3 ways that we do this. We've already kind of, intimated some of these already. I think the first one is that we doubt ourselves. We think, I'm not able to do this. Someone else is able to do this, but I cannot do this. I'm not able to. I'm not smart enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm not good looking enough. We doubt ourselves. And we think that we are at a disadvantage compared to other people. And all of us have things in ourselves that, yes, are probably less great than other people, but we have things that are better than other people as well. But we tend to doubt ourselves quite quickly when we try to start to do something new. Children don't do this when they're very young. They just go for it, and that's how they learn in the world. But as we get older, this self-regulation starts to kick in. We get hard on ourselves and we doubt ourselves. The second way is that we judge ourselves. And this is similar to doubting, but we judge ourselves and we say, I'm a bad person, or I'm not worthy, or I'm ugly, or I'm not smart enough, or whatever. And we judge ourselves negatively. And especially we will do this compared to other people. We'll look at the people around us and we'll be very cruel to ourselves comparatively. And there's 1,000 ways that you can do this. You can do it with physical appearance. You can do it with status and success in life. You can do it because someone has something that you don't have, whatever. We will judge ourselves and compare ourselves unfavorably, and that will tend to create this negative spiral in ourselves. And that's how we harden ourselves. And the third one, I believe, is what I call rehashing. This is where we tend to go over and over and over the same thing that we did or we said or we're thinking of doing in our lives. And this tends to create this negative loop of being hard on ourselves. Well, what if I say this? What are they going to think? Or what will happen if I do this? Will I get judged, or will I get criticized, or will I fail? And we rehash the potential moment. Or if we did do something in the past, oh, why did I say that? What was I thinking? If only I said this instead. We live in this constant rehashing phase of going over and over. And it's almost like an OCD loop that we can't get out of. So those three things, doubting, judging, and rehashing, those are the three components I've noticed in myself and from people I've talked to about this that we tend to fall into when we're being too hard on ourselves. Good to know what they are, because we can catch ourselves in the act when we do it. So think about those in yourself and which ones are your favorites as we go through this next section. All right, let's talk about 3 ways that I believe we can stop being so harsh on ourselves. 3 things that I have learned that worked for me personally, that I've talked with other people about, that I've read about, that have really helped me to stop being so hard on myself and to live a more balanced life and to feel more confident in what I'm doing and who I am as a person. The first one is to accept reality in a neutral way. Accept reality in a neutral way. And what I mean by this is that there is a reality in any situation that you're in. And generally speaking, when you're judging yourself harshly or you're being too hard on yourself, what you're doing is you're looking at reality, but you're looking at it in a very subjective way, in a very negative way. What I would suggest is stepping back a little bit and just being neutral. Imagine you were kind of like a third-party observer in the situation that you're in. Let's say you say something in a group in public and everyone just goes quiet and doesn't say anything. Internally, you're thinking, oh no, they're all judging me. What did I say? Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I should have said this. I should have shut up, whatever. Let's look at it objectively, facing reality in a neutral way. You can say, okay, I said some words. People listened to those words and there was no response. That's the neutral observation. That's it. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just neutral. And you have to accept that's what happened and you have to move on. If you do this in your life with anything that you're worried about or you're thinking about or you're being hard on yourself about, there is a real situation that happened, a reality that happened, and it's very neutral. Your judgments are what makes it worse. So whatever the situation is, accept that it happened and say, okay, I said or I did this or I didn't do this or whatever, and just say, that's what happened. And just sit with it and be neutral as you possibly can. You will find that that helps you to take a step back. Like I was saying, it almost puts you in that third person role. You look at the situation and you realize that probably no one else was affected by it. No one else really cared. In the example I just gave, you said something, they heard it. They were probably thinking about something else in their head. Who cares, right? So accept the reality in a neutral way. That is number one. That's really helped me to overcome this harsh criticism inside of myself. Number 2 is to look for the lesson. So whenever we make a mistake in our lives, there is, generally speaking, a good lesson that we can learn to adjust and to adapt and to evolve as a person. So whatever it is that you're doing in your life, you're evolving and you're growing and you're becoming better as a person. That is because you're learning and you're developing day by day. In any situation where you are being hard on yourself, generally speaking, there is a lesson that you can learn. You can say, okay, let's say you're overweight right now. All right, fine. You're overweight. Accept the reality. It's a neutral judgment. I weigh this much. That's the reality. It's not good, bad. It's just reality. Okay, what's the lesson? What can we learn in this situation? What is causing this to happen? Another part of this is to think that inside of the problem is the solution. So if, let's say, you're overweight from where you want to be, okay, what's causing that? Well, probably lack of exercise, eating too many calories, living a less than active lifestyle, maybe not sleeping well, whatever. You know the components, what the problem actually is. And if you divide up that problem and you look at it, there's a lesson in there, there's a solution in there that you could solve it with. One of them might be to get better sleep, to drink more water, to eat less calories per day, whatever. It's pretty simple when you think about it, but the lesson is inside the situation. So whatever it is that you're judging yourself harshly about, you're being mean to yourself with, just look for the lesson and say, all right, what happened? What did I do? What did I say? What did I not say? What's the lesson? What should I adjust next time? And if you do it that way, it kind of gives you, again, that third party step, helps you step back a little bit, but it gives you a more objective view of this situation, and it helps you to actually learn and to adapt and to evolve. This is one of the things I love about public speaking, because you're in front of a group and you have no time to judge yourself because you're in the moment and people are watching you. They're taking in what you're saying. You might feel initially like they're judging you, but actually they're just absorbing it. And you can slowly adapt over time. If you keep doing it, you go, okay, when I begin, I should have a bit more energy, or I should share a story, or I should finish with a strong statement. And you start to add these different components because you're learning the lesson as you go. If you just listen to your inner critic and go, oh, I suck at this, I'm never doing it again, that's not going to help you. But if you keep doing it over time, you look for the lesson, it gets a lot easier and you become much better at it. Speaking from experience here, that's how I've done it over many, many years. So look for the lesson. That's number 2. And number 3, which I think might be the most important one, is to be a good friend to yourself. This is something that is very interesting. If you had a friend who was in the same situation, who did or said or was feeling the way you are feeling right now, what would you say to them? You would probably say, hey, don't worry about it. Who cares? You're fine. You're doing great. Keep going. People love you, whatever. You would find a way to build them up and to support them and to encourage them. Weirdly, we don't do this for ourselves. We treat ourselves like absolute crap, and we are judgmental and harsh on ourselves, where if it was a good friend of ours, we would be very supportive and very kind to them. So whatever judgment you are feeling, whatever harshness you are compelling yourself to have inside right now, say, if this was my good friend, and think of a good friend that you have, how would I treat them? What would I say to them in this situation? And you probably have a very different type of talking than you have in your head right now. So whatever that is, whatever the situation, be a good friend to yourself. Go easier on yourself. Be kinder to yourself. I know that's a bit of a cliche these days, but it's true. If you would treat yourself just like you treat a good friend, life would be a lot easier. And I have felt this for myself at times where I've really screwed something up. I've stopped and gone, hey, buddy, it's okay. Okay, that didn't work out like you wanted. Fair enough. Roll with it. You're going to be fine. And just saying something like that to myself in the moment, it actually makes me feel better about myself. And I'm actually able to cope and to move on quicker and to regulate easier because of that. So be a good friend to yourself. As corny as it might sound, you internally have another voice there that can be a good friend, or it can be an enemy, depending on which side of it you choose to listen to. So most of all, be a good friend to yourself. So there we go, my friends. Those are 3 things that you can do. Number 1, accept the reality in a neutral way. Number 2, look for the lesson in the situation. And number 3, be a good friend to yourself. Doing those 3 things, I have found, for me anyway, make me less hard on myself and less tough and mean and cruel. And they've really helped me to grow and develop as a person and enjoy life a lot more. The final thing that I want to share with you is that all of life is on a continuum. So if you think about failure and you think about success, Somewhere in the middle is where we sit. None of us have a perfect life of success. None of us are an abject total failure. We're somewhere in the middle of this continuum. And at times of your life, you're probably going to be over this side. Sometimes you're going to be over this side. The key is to see it on a continuum and realize life has its ebbs and flows, its ups and downs, and you have to roll with it and you have to ride with it. But the passenger in the car with you is your own brain, is your own mind, the part of you that's talking to you. So you have to choose while you're on this continuum, this journey, which type of passenger you're going to be. As weird as that sounds, there is two people in there. There's the conscious and then there's the part of you that's constantly talking. Be the kind of passenger on that journey that actually supports yourself and helps yourself to grow. All right, my friends, I hope that is useful for you. That is all my knowledge and ideas about why we are so hard on ourselves. These are ideas that have helped me over many years, and I still have to remember, even just writing this down over the last couple of days was a great exercise in reminding myself how to be better at this. And I hope it's useful for you as well. To those of you on Instagram and to those of you on YouTube, I appreciate you all very much. Looks like we have a couple of people here today, which is great. And we have a comment here from Arthur. I don't know if you're still here, Arthur, but you said, I needed to hear this today. Thank you for streaming, good sir. Well, thank you, my friend. I'm glad that it was useful for you. I know many times in my life where I've just been beating myself up for the wrong reasons, just kind of taking a step back and saying, hey, I need to be better about treating myself well. And maybe these ideas will help you in that way, just to get a bit more of that neutrality and kindness towards yourself. And also our community here is pretty friendly and kindly too. So make sure to connect with them as much as you can and to be supportive of others, just as they're supportive of you. All right. Well, that is everything for today. Again, I hope these ideas are useful for you. I appreciate every single one of you for being here. We will be back next week for episode 16 of Self-Improvement Saturday. We're rolling along here. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate you all. Thank you for watching. And as I always say, thank you for improving yourself.